Hi, welcome to lecture 1.1. This is going to be the basics of economics. So these are going to be some video recordings, and we're just going to go through section by section. And this is the first one. So this is how economists think and what economics is. So let's get started. I'm going to zoom in. All right. So what is economics? First off, economics is really the study of how people make decisions. So economics is a social science at its core, and we want to understand why people make the decisions that they do. And we usually think that there's some basic assumptions such as people face trade-offs and resources are scarce. So people have unlimited wants and desires, but there's only a limited amount of resources to fulfill those desires. So people face trade-offs, and we want to understand why do people make those decisions that they do in the face of those trade-offs. So what are some of the principles of economics? Some of the things that we start at is the basics. And the first one, obviously, we've said is trade-offs. So we have trade-offs, and fundamentally, we say that resources are scarce, so any decision that we make means that we have to give up something in return. So all right, so when we make a decision, we face trade-offs because resources are scarce. So for example, during finals week, suppose that we have five finals in 3 days. So we only have 72 hours to cram, so we have 3 days, which is a set time constraint. Our time is our resource here, and it's finite. So we only have 72 hours to prepare for 5 finals. So if we spend 4 hours studying for one final, such as accounting, that means that we've given up 4 hours, or we have 4 hours less to study for other things. So we give up on numerous other things. So studying for the other 4 finals to study for accounting, or we give up 4 hours of sleep, 4 hours to eat, 4 hours to pack, hang out with friends. We've given up numerous things, and we have to decide in the face of those 72 hours, how do we decide how to allocate our time to study 4 or 5 finals, plus the other things that we need to do, such as sleep? Okay, so everybody faces trade-offs, and this is fundamentally the deciding factor when we make decisions, is what do we give up, okay? We also look at one specific type of trade-off, and it's the opportunity cost. And the opportunity cost is basically the cost of what we've given up to do any activity that we choose to do. So it's the value of the next best alternative. Okay, so our opportunity cost of going into Econ 1, well, it takes 1 hour and 15 minutes, so what would you have been doing if you had not come to class? That's the value, or that's the opportunity cost of going to Econ. So for some of you, that may have been sleeping for 1 hour and 15 minutes. Okay, so you've given up 1 hour and 15 minutes of sleep, which you would have done if you had not come to class, and that would be the opportunity cost of coming to your Econ class. For some of you, it may be eating, it may be hanging out with friends, it may be working out. People may choose different things, but what each of you would have done if you did not come to class is what you have forfeited are the value of the next best alternative. So the opportunity cost of coming to class is what you forfeited to come to class. And also what you, so the payout, so what did the tuition for this class cost and the book cost for this class, so forth. Okay, so in the face of trade-offs, we focus on one trade-off, which is the next best alternative. And that's what we really calculate in when we face in what is the cost of every decision that we make. Well, we've given up something, and fundamentally, we can't study for all 5 finals at the same time. So if we study for one final, we may have studied for a different final, but not 4 others. So the next best alternative is one specific type of trade-off, and that's really what it costs to make any decision that you make. All right, number 3 are the third thing that we focus on in our decisions is incentives. Okay, and incentives are basically factors that motivate people to action. Okay, sorry if that's a little small. But incentives are factors that motivate people to action. Okay, so I think we all know what incentives are, but in every decision there may be certain incentives that drive you to make the decision that you've done, and we want to understand what those incentives are as economists. Okay, and there's 2 types of incentives. We have explicit or implicit incentives, or direct or indirect. Okay, so let's focus on direct incentives. Okay, and that may be something as simple as it's the direct incentive of any decision. So I can motivate all of you to study an hour of economics. So if I offered everybody $100 to study 1 more hour of economics each semester, I bet all of you would study for an extra hour to receive that $100. So that's an example of a direct incentive. Okay, so so I pay $100 for 1 hour of studying. So when you study economics for 1 extra hour, I give you a $100 bill. Okay, so that would be an example of a direct incentive. All of you would study economics for an additional hour. And here the incentive is in a monetary form, and that's usually how we think of incentives in economics. But there's other ones as well. Okay, so the direct incentive is I'm paying directly for you to study econ. But there's also some indirect incentives there as well. Okay, so we have indirect. So if I'm paying you $100 to study an additional hour of econ, that may mean that you give up an hour of studying accounting. Okay, so if you forfeited studying an hour of accounting, that's not what I'm really trying to incentivize, but that's one of the side effects of offering this incentive. Okay, so the indirect incentive would maybe studying an hour less for another course, and we'll just call it accounting. So if you spend an hour less studying accounting, that would be your indirect incentive. So in every decision you face, we want to understand, are there incentives that motivate that decision? Okay, so I can drive people to action. I can postpone you from buying gasoline. I can incentivize you to buy more gasoline today, right? There are different ways to have these incentives. And typically, most people only focus on the direct incentives. But the indirect incentives are where some really fascinating stuff happens. Okay, so for example, there's an economist, and since most economists like to think that they're very smart and that we can do it better than anyone else, there is an economist who turned into a father. So he had a child, and like most economists, he thought he could potty train his child better than the mother could because he's an economist and he understands incentives because that's what we study. So he said, let me take a shot at trying to potty train our daughter because the mother didn't have any luck. So what he did is he said, I'm going to set up an incentive scheme for our child to learn how to potty train. So every time that she uses the kiddie toilet, I'm going to give her some candy. So the incentive was for her to use the kiddie toilet, which would be a form of potty training. So every time that she used it, she would get candy. And so the direct incentive was getting her to use the kiddie toilet. But there were some indirect incentives there as well. Okay? So the way that it was is that every time she used the toilet, she got candy. So for the first day or two, it worked out very well, is that she was potty training like a pro because she wanted the candy. For her, she wanted to maximize her happiness through candy. Okay, so she did it for a couple days. But after a couple days, she realized there's some indirect incentives. So what she would do is that she learned how to hold it like a champ. Basically, she would go to the bathroom just a little bit and then hold it for 10 minutes. So she would get candy for going that first time. Then she'd hold it for 10 minutes and go use the bathroom again and get more candy. And then she would go just a little bit, but not all the way. And then she would wait for 10 minutes, go to the bathroom again, just a little bit, right? So she's not really potty training in the sense that we would want her to, because the indirect incentives told her that she can maximize her candy that she gets if she just goes a little bit and then waits a little bit and then goes again. Okay, so there's some really fascinating things that happen with incentives, and usually when we think about incentives, we think about the direct incentives, but the fascinating stuff and the really interesting things about economics happen with the indirect incentives. So we're going to spend a lot of time studying incentives, or what are the incentives of some policy actions, what are the incentives for you to choose to go to college, what are the incentives for drug dealers. Okay, and that's what we really focus on in economics. All right, so those are the first three things. All right, the next ones are how people make decisions. And we say that optimal decisions are rational people make decisions at the margin. Let me zoom in. So rational people make decisions at the margin. And what we mean by the margin is at the extra, okay, or all right, so one way to think about this is, how do I maximize my happiness when I'm choosing to eat pizza? Okay, so I can eat a lot of pizza, but we usually don't go into eating pizza thinking, all right, I'm going to eat 7 slices today, right? So how do we decide to eat pizza? Usually we'll eat the first piece, and then we decide, should we have a second piece? And then we decide, should we have a third piece? So we're deciding, after I've had the second piece, should I have an extra piece or the third piece of pizza? And this is really how optimal decisions are made. Okay, so, right, we decide if we're going to eat the 5th slice of pizza after we've already eaten 4, not after we've eaten the first one. Right? We don't eat 1 piece of pizza and go, yep, I'm going to have 7. Right? So we would eat the 6th piece and then decide, should we eat the 7th piece of pizza? Okay? And if we're going to make optimal decisions, or if we're rational and we use all available information to make decisions, then we optimize our decisions by thinking at the margin. Okay? And that's just one of the principles that come out. So we always think about the margin. What is the marginal cost? Okay, so the opportunity cost is going to be the marginal cost and the marginal benefit. So when we make decisions with trade-offs, there's a cost and a benefit to every decision. We have the opportunity cost, but we get some sort of benefit in return. So when we weigh those costs and benefits at the margin, that's when we make optimal decisions. Okay, so it's not the total cost and the total benefit, but the marginal cost and the marginal benefit for every additional piece of pizza. Okay. All right. The next one is trade. And economists like to focus on trade because people naturally tend to trade. And we think people tend to trade because people can benefit from trade. Or trade can make everyone better off. Okay, so what's one example of a trade? So if we think about, let's say, there's an accounting teacher and he needs a babysitter. And maybe the babysitter is in college and she is taking accounting and she needs extra help with accounting. So there, the accounting teacher might trade an hour of accounting tutoring for an hour of babysitting. Okay? And there, it would make both better off. So the accounting teacher would obviously, if he agreed to that trade, or there was a voluntary exchange of those in that trade, then the accounting teacher would have said yes, only if he values the value of the babysitting more than he values the cost of his hour of tutoring accounting. And for the babysitter, she would only agree to that trade if she felt that the accounting tutoring would offset or exceed the benefit of that accounting tutoring would outweigh the cost of an hour of babysitting the accounting teacher's children. So in that case, if they did trade, both would feel better off. Or let me give another example using money. So I go to Walmart and I buy a TV, right? If I choose to buy that TV, obviously I'm giving up money for that TV. So I feel that I'm going to get more value out of the TV, more so than I value the money. Otherwise, I wouldn't have bought the TV. So if I pay $100 for a TV, I feel that I'm going to be better off with the TV rather than the $100. And for Walmart, they wouldn't have sold me that TV unless they feel that they would be better off with the $100 rather than the TV. So in that case, there was a voluntary exchange of money for a TV, and we're both better off. Walmart feels that they're better off with the $100 rather than the TV, and I feel better off with a TV rather than the $100. So we made a trade, and everyone was better off. So trade is not a zero-sum game. There's maybe some winners and some losers, but overall we say that the winners exceed the losers, or the total winnings in trade exceed the losses in trade. Okay? So trade can make everyone better off. The next one is markets. When we focus on trade, we think of people coming together and trading in markets. Okay? And markets is a group of buyers and sellers and the arrangement in which they come together to trade. So a group of buyers and sellers and the arrangement in which they trade. Okay? And in economics, we think of markets is typically one of the best ways to organize trade. And when we think of a market, it's simply a group of buyers and sellers, and there's no outside influence. So markets tend to do a very good job of organizing buyers and sellers and organizing trade. However, it may not be the best way, and we need to understand what are some of the assumptions necessary for markets to have the best outcome. And we're going to study what those are. Okay, let's see. Next one is we need a way to weigh these things. So if I say that markets are better, like a market economy is better than a command economy or a dictatorship, where so we have one person or the government making the decisions on what people get instead of buyers and sellers, then we need a way to weigh that. How do we weigh better or worse off? So we have to use a criterion. And our criterion in here is going to be efficiency. Okay, so there's really two criteria on which to weigh better or worse off. And the ones that we're going to use in here are efficiency and equity. So let's start with efficiency. Okay, and efficiency, there's two types of efficiency. There's allocative efficiency and productive efficiency. So productive efficiency means that things are produced at the lowest cost. So let's say that there's one way to build a car, and so time is a cost because it's something that we have a finite limit on. So if we're producing a car, I'm going to say that if we can produce the exact same vehicle, but it takes one person 2 hours and one person 1 hour, then the person who produces it in 1 hour is more efficient or more productively efficient than the person who produces it in 2 hours. Okay, so here they're producing it at a lower cost because they forfeit less time to produce a car rather than the other person. Okay, so productive efficiency is things are produced at the lowest cost. The second type of efficiency is allocative efficiency. And allocative efficiency means that what we've produced maximizes happiness. Okay, and this is going to be our basic criterion. And what we're going to say is that trade maximizes efficiency. So number one, if we can specialize and trade in what we're good at, productively efficient at, and then once those things are produced, we can trade what has been produced to maximize happiness. Okay, so our baseline is going to be efficiency. The second criterion on which to weigh better or worse off is going to be equity. And equity is going to be a little bit harder to define. So some people might say that the root of equity is equal, so it means everybody has equal amounts. Okay? But I think most of us would agree that equity in some sense is what is fair. So we have to think of what is fair allocations and fair ways of producing. Okay? But fair is harder to define, and it's more problematic because it's harder since we can't define it, and what is fair to one person may not be fair to another person. So here, efficiency is what we're driving for, and most economists would say that equal outcomes are not efficient. And here's why. So for example, suppose that I have two goods, and I'm going to give them to every student. I have mushrooms and onions. Okay? So most people would say, well, what we should do is I should give equal number of mushrooms and onions to everyone. So if I give one person 5 mushrooms, I should give everyone 5 mushrooms. Or I take up all my mushrooms, divide it by the number of people in the class, and that's how many mushrooms every individual gets. And then I do the same thing for the onions that I have. Okay? But then I'm going to leave the room. So if I leave the room, some person may really, really like onions, but they hate mushrooms. Okay, so that person hates the mushrooms that they have, but they love the onions that they have. And another person may really love mushrooms, but he hates onions. So he would rather have mushrooms rather than the onions. So if I leave the room, what is the first thing that they're going to do? Well, they started out with an equal outcome. Everybody had the same allocation. But I leave the room, and the person who loves onions but hates mushrooms is going to trade his mushrooms away for onions to the person who loves mushrooms but hates onions. Okay, so they're going to conduct a trade. So one person has, the onion lover is going to have only onions, and the mushroom lover is going to have only mushrooms. So we started out with an equal outcome, but they traded away to an unequal outcome. Okay, and that's because everybody has different tastes and preferences, is that we're not all equal in what we enjoy. And so therefore, having an equal distribution doesn't always ensure that we're efficient. So they conducted a trade where we had mushrooms and onions that were already produced, and they traded away and they maximized their happiness, or total happiness went up after the trade. So they went from an equal distribution to an unequal distribution, but their efficiency went up. So sometimes there's going to be a trade-off between equitable distributions and efficient distributions. However, with one clause is what we say is equal outcomes are not going to be efficient. However, everybody should have the equal opportunity for an outcome, such as if we think about college. So some of you may have friends from your hometown that did not go to college. And this could be for two reasons. The first one would be an efficient reason, is that some people preferred not to go to college, is that they decided that they would be better off or more happy by not going to college and starting a career. Okay, so they might have had a job right out of high school, and they went into that job choosing not to go to college. Okay, so we have an unequal outcome, one person going to college, one person not, but that was an efficient reason, right? So that outcome was unequal because they each had equal opportunity to go to college, but one person chose to maximize their happiness by not going to college. The second way would be an unequal outcome because of an unequal opportunity to go to college, such as a person would have really enjoyed to go to college. They would have maximized their happiness to go to college, but let's say that their family couldn't afford to go to college, for them to go to college. So if their family couldn't afford it, obviously we have something there. They would have been happier going to college and paying out the money. They simply didn't have the money. So in that case, we have an equitable or an unequitable outcome based on unequal opportunity. And if we have unequal opportunity, that's not going to be an efficient way, because that one person who couldn't afford to go to college would have been happier by paying money to go to college. So we're unequitable and inefficient at the same time. So sometimes these two things go hand in hand, sometimes they don't. Okay? But overall, we're going to spend a lot of time looking at these things. Okay, so to wrap up, we're going to focus on trade-offs. Okay, so what did we forfeit in any activity that we decided? So we studied trade-offs, and we studied the next best alternative, which is the opportunity cost. So the true cost to any activity that you pursue is the money that it cost you plus what you forfeited to do that activity. Okay? The third thing is that we look at incentives, and we have direct incentives and indirect incentives. Fourth, optimal people or rational people make optimal decisions at the margin. So we're going to think at the extra, not on the whole. And then we think of trade. So trade can make everyone better off. And then we focus on how trade is organized, and we usually focus through markets. So we're going to study markets. And then when we weigh better or worse off, so we're going to study all of those things, and we're going to say, is this better off, is it worse off? The criteria in which we're going to use is efficiency. Okay? But we should have equity in the back of our mind. Is this an equitable distribution, or is it unequal but maximizing efficiency, or is it inefficient and inequitable? Okay? So that's the end of this lecture, and that's the basis of economics.